You're nothing but a pathetic loser, and I'll crush you!
Oh, please, honey, your daddy's money won't save you from the reality of your own stupidity.
You think you're all-knowing? Screw you, I don't care about your run your courtroom, you're nothing!
The courtroom had never seen arrogance displayed with such unapologetic intensity. At just 25 years old, Veronica Halle, the daughter of tech mogul Thomas Halle, whose fortune exceeded $9 billion, walked into Judge Judy Files' courtroom as if she owned it. She wore a cream-colored door blazer with the tag still dangling, designer heels clicking against the polished floor like a challenge. Every movement, from her diamond-studded watch glinting under the courtroom lights to her perfectly manicured hands flipping through paperwork, screamed privilege. Her entourage, including a personal stylist, a public relations assistant, and a high-priced attorney, flanked her like she was royalty. The air practically vibrated with the unspoken certainty that money could bend the world to her will. Veronica's lips curved into a faint, smug smile as she took her seat. She didn't just expect deference. She demanded it. Her gaze swept over the gallery of reporters, cameras, and the defendant, a woman whose quiet presence suggested strength rather than intimidation. That woman, Rosa Delgado, a 54-year-old immigrant who had spent decades building a small, thriving bakery in Los Angeles, sat clutching a single folder of contracts and receipts, her hands slightly trembling but her chin held high. Rosa's journey had been the embodiment of the American dream, arriving in the United States with just $1,200 in her pocket, working double shifts in restaurants, taking night classes, and finally, after years of dedication, establishing a business she could call her own. Veronica had no idea that the courtroom wasn't a stage for flaunting wealth or influence. Her plan was to bully, intimidate, and manipulate her way to victory using her father's billions and a carefully curated social media presence. She leaned toward her attorney with an air of absolute superiority, whispering, "This judge is outdated. She doesn't understand modern business. I'll have her reputation ruined before she even realizes it." The statement, dripping with entitlement, wasn't quiet enough to escape the microphones. The courtroom shifted subtly, the air thickening as those who had seen Judge Judy in action sensed the storm brewing. Judge Judy, unflinching and composed, lifted her reading glasses and regarded Veronica with the quiet patience of a predator, observing prey that believed itself untouchable. Her calm was unnerving, a deliberate contrast to the arrogance radiating from the young heiress. Veronica, however, saw it as weakness and smirked, unaware that she was underestimating decades of experience, legal mastery, and a reputation built on dismantling precisely this type of privilege. The case seemed straightforward on paper, a dispute over a catering contract involving a high-profile charity event that Veronica had advertised as benefiting underprivileged children. Veronica's team had expected a quick resolution. They had prepared flashy presentations, paid social media promotions to manipulate public opinion, and even tried to buy credibility through influencer connections. But what they hadn't accounted for was the thoroughness of Judge Judy's preparation. Over the previous month, the judge had reviewed documents, interviewed witnesses, and examined the pattern of behavior that painted Veronica as not just entitled, but systematically predatory. Veronica's father's legal team had previously enabled her behavior, filing dozens of aggressive lawsuits against small businesses with little regard for the actual merits of each case. She had weaponized wealth and influence, extracting hundreds of thousands from immigrant-owned enterprises across California. Her social media, meticulously curated to appear benevolent and philanthropic, concealed a darker reality. A young woman who thrived on the intimidation of those she believed could never fight back. Rosa Delgado's testimony began with quiet dignity. She described the painstaking effort it took to build her bakery, how she had spent years earning the trust of clients and creating a business that reflected her values. She explained how Veronica had contacted her under the guise of a charity event, requesting premium catering services and promising exposure that would change her business forever. Rosa had agreed, offering services at a discounted rate, believing in the integrity of the young heiress. But within 24 hours, Veronica's demands had escalated beyond reason, asking for tens of thousands of dollars in additional services for free, and threatening to tarnish Rosa's reputation when she politely declined. Veronica's smirk deepened as she listened, certain that Rosa's small business experience was irrelevant next to the combined might of her father's attorneys and her millions of social media followers. She leaned back, crossing her legs, and whispered loudly enough for cameras to pick up. She doesn't understand how the real world works. This is how business is done now. The arrogance in her voice was palpable, a toxin in the room that seemed to feed her sense of invincibility. Judge Judy's voice cut through the tension like a scalpel. Miss Hawley, are you suggesting that intimidating immigrants and exploiting small businesses is an acceptable way to conduct commerce? Veronica blinked, taken aback. Her attorney tried to interject, but the judge's gaze silenced him instantly. The courtroom was still, every eye locked on the confrontation between experience and entitlement, reality and illusion. Veronica's first misstep was subtle but fatal. She laughed, a light, dismissive chuckle that reflected her disbelief that someone could challenge her authority. The gallery gasped, understanding the magnitude of her error. Judge Judy didn't miss a beat. Every seasoned viewer knew that laughter in the face of the law, when coupled with threats and contempt, was the exact moment when legal reckoning began. The judge continued methodically, unraveling Veronica's defense piece by piece. She questioned the legitimacy of the charity claims, cross-referenced contracts, and presented evidence that Veronica had previously filed lawsuits against multiple small businesses, all with strikingly similar tactics. Each document, each testimony, built an undeniable picture of predatory behavior. Veronica's confidence began to waver imperceptibly, but she was far from defeated. She tried to regain control, rolling her eyes at Rosa and muttering under her breath, "This is ridiculous, she can't possibly win." Judge Judy, however, was just warming up. She had been preparing for this moment, anticipating every arrogant word, every dismissive gesture. Veronica's failure to comprehend the depth of her own exposure was about to cost her dearly. The judge's team had assembled social media evidence, financial records, and witness statements that collectively painted Veronica as a calculated manipulator, someone who viewed litigation as a game and real people as disposable pieces. Then came the first verbal strike, subtle but lethal. "Miss Hawley, your pattern of behavior is not only unethical, it's illegal. 5 years, 23 cases, systematically targeting those who cannot fight back. And yet, here you are, treating this courtroom like a stage for your theatrics." Veronica's face paled slightly, but she tried to maintain her composure. She wasn't accustomed to being confronted with evidence she couldn't spin or buy off. Rosa, quietly observing, felt a glimmer of hope. The same court that had seemed a place of intimidation, a place where the rich and entitled could wield influence with impunity, was now revealing its true power. The judge's calm, deliberate pace ensured that Veronica could not interrupt, could not dominate, and could not evade the weight of justice as the first hour concluded. The courtroom buzzed with an almost tangible energy. Veronica's self-assured posture was cracking, her smiles forced, her gestures less fluid. The audience, reporters, and attorneys alike sensed the slow dismantling of an empire built not on skill or integrity, but on arrogance and unchecked privilege. Veronica Hawley, daughter of a billionaire social media influencer, and a woman accustomed to bending the world to her will, had no idea that her carefully constructed illusion of power was about to be obliterated. Judge Judy had not yet raised her voice, had not yet struck the gavel, but the storm had already begun. Every word, every question, every pause was a prelude to the reckoning that would define this courtroom drama for years to come. And in that moment, as the cameras rolled and the audience held its collective breath, Veronica Hale's first true lesson in accountability was beginning, one that money, influence, or family connections could never protect her from. The courtroom settled into a tense silence as Judge Judy fixed Veronica Hale with a gaze that could pierce steel. Every second she waited to speak was calculated, a predator observing the prey squirm before the strike. Veronica, accustomed to commanding attention and getting her way, felt a strange unease creeping up her spine. It wasn't the cameras, the audience, or even Rosa's composed demeanor that unsettled her. It was the calm, controlled authority of Judge Judy, an authority built not on money, but on decades of experience dismantling arrogance like hers. Veronica's attorney shifted in his seat, whispering hurriedly, trying to remind her that this was just a small claims case. But Veronica waved him off dismissively. Her smirk returned, more out of habit than confidence, and she leaned toward Rosa with a casual sneer. "Hope you've got receipts, sweetheart," she whispered loud enough for a camera to catch. "Because all I need is one loophole to end this before it even starts." Rosa's calm eyes met hers, unshaken, holding the quiet weight of someone who had survived far more than a spoiled billionaire's tantrum. Judge Judy began methodically questioning Veronica about the supposed charity event. The questions were simple on the surface, but every word was a trap. "Miss Hawley," the judge asked, "how many times have you contacted small business owners under the pretense of a charitable event in the past 5 years?" Veronica laughed, an icy, dismissive sound that echoed in the courtroom, turning heads. "I don't keep count. People exaggerate everything," she replied, flicking her perfectly manicured hand as if brushing off an insect. But her arrogance had blinded her to the fact that every lie, every omission, had already been documented. Judge Judy's team had meticulously cataloged each instance, and the judge's next words sliced through her veneer of control. "You don't keep count," Judge Judy said slowly, her voice deceptively calm. "Yet our records show 23 separate cases involving small business owners, all targeted after refusing to provide unpaid services, all involving people who were vulnerable. Care to explain that pattern?" Veronica's confident posture faltered, and she glanced toward her attorney, who was frantically shuffling papers, searching for any plausible defense. But there was none. The evidence was airtight, and the judge knew it. Veronica's voice rose, dripping with indignation. "That's not true. Those were legitimate business disputes. People couldn't fulfill contracts, or they didn't understand proper business standards." Her words, intended to sound defensive, only made her seem more desperate. She had underestimated the experience in front of her. Judge Judy's eyes narrowed, and the courtroom seemed to shrink, the air thick with anticipation. "Proper business standards?" The judge replied, her tone sharp, cutting through the tension. "Miss Hawley, you filed lawsuits demanding tens of thousands of dollars from people who could barely make payroll. You manipulated contracts, posted threats online, and used your father's legal team to terrorize vulnerable business owners. That is not business, it is extortion." A collective murmur rippled through the gallery. Even the cameras, trained on the drama, seemed to capture the change in Veronica's demeanor. She leaned back, attempting to hide the faint tremor in her hands, but her eyes betrayed a growing panic. "Judge," Judy continued, presenting evidence in a calm, surgical manner. Screens lit up with screenshots of Instagram posts where Veronica bragged about her lawsuits, mocking the victims and celebrating every forced settlement. Documents were displayed showing unreported income, financial transfers through shell companies, and aggressive letters sent to terrified business owners. Each piece was a hammer strike, and Veronica's polished facade began to crack under the relentless exposure. Veronica snapped, finally losing a fragment of her composure. "This is ridiculous. Those posts were jokes. No one takes them seriously. You're twisting everything," she shouted, her voice echoing in the courtroom. Her attorney tried to pull her back into control, but she shrugged him off, the mix of fear and arrogance fueling her defiance. Judge Judy didn't flinch. The judge's silence was louder than any argument Veronica could make. Every eye in the room was fixed on her unraveling. Sensing the impending collapse of entitlement, "Miss Hawley," Judge Judy said, her voice dropping to a controlled whisper that carried the weight of decades of authority. "It appears you have systematically targeted immigrant-owned businesses, exploited them financially, and used threats of litigation as a weapon. How do you justify that as anything other than fraud?" Veronica's throat went dry. For the first time, she struggled to form words. Her social media bravado, her millions of followers, Her father's fortune, all of it meant nothing against the meticulous preparation of the courtroom and the moral authority of the judge. Rosa's calm presence only amplified Veronica's growing panic. The contrast between the two women could not have been starker. Rosa had nothing to lose but dignity, yet she radiated strength and truth. Veronica had everything to lose, yet her confidence was dissolving in real time. Cameras caught her frantic attempts to text her team, whisper orders, and salvage the situation, but nothing could stop the avalanche. Judge Judy leaned forward, her pen poised above the red folder labeled confidential, the contents of which would ultimately seal Veronica's fate. "Miss Hawley," she said, the quiet menace in her voice unmistakable, "you have manipulated contracts, extorted small business owners, and hidden income to avoid reporting. Your actions have consequences, and you are about to face them fully." The statement landed like a hammer blow. Veronica's smirk vanished entirely. Her hands gripped the edge of the table, knuckles white. As the reality of her situation began to sink in, the audience could feel the tension building, an almost physical pressure in the room. Veronica's attorney whispered frantic instructions, trying to salvage what little credibility remained. Veronica, however, interrupted him with a desperate gesture, attempting to regain dominance. "I'll ruin your career, lady," she shouted toward Judge Judy, her voice echoing through the chamber. The words were meant to intimidate, but they were instead the spark that ignited the judge's calculated fury. Judge Judy's gaze hardened, ice in her eyes. "Miss Hawley," she replied, her voice calm but deadly, "threatening me in my courtroom is not a display of power, it is the moment. You crossed the line from arrogance to criminal recklessness." Veronica froze. The words hit her like a blow she hadn't anticipated. The courtroom watched, mesmerized, as the daughter of a billionaire realized for the first time that wealth could not shield her from accountability. Judge Judy then revealed the first set of evidence from the red folder, detailed financial records, communications with victims, and the trail of unreported settlement income. Each document stripped away the layers of Veronica's privilege, exposing her systematic abuse of power. The screens displayed totals, dates, and transactions, leaving no room for denial. Veronica's face turned pale, her hands shaking visibly. Her entitlement had not prepared her for scrutiny backed by evidence. Rosa watched quietly, holding her own emotions in check. She had survived months of intimidation, threats, and public shaming orchestrated by Veronica. Now, finally, justice was being served in a courtroom where experience, evidence, and truth held more weight than money or influence. Veronica's collapse was not immediate, but it was inevitable. Every defensive gesture, every gasp, every muttered excuse was met with the unwavering authority of Judge Judy. Each question a surgical probe into the pattern of exploitation. Veronica had spent years constructing doubt by the end of the first half of the trial. It was clear to everyone watching that the arrogant heiress had underestimated the law, the courtroom, and the woman presiding over it. The arrogance that had allowed her to terrorize vulnerable business owners now threatened to destroy her entirely. The stage was set for the most explosive courtroom reckoning in recent memory, and the audience could only watch as the first cracks in Veronica Hale's empire of entitlement widened. Veronica Hale's composure was crumbling fast. Each passing second in Judge Judy's courtroom chipped away at her confidence like a sculptor carving stone, exposing the raw, vulnerable core she had spent 24 years hiding behind designer labels and a multi-billion-dollar name. Her diamond bracelet caught the lights of the courtroom cameras one last time, but it did little to shield her from the avalanche of evidence now being displayed on the monitors. Screens filled with contracts, emails, and invoices meticulously arranged by Judge Judy's team illustrated a clear, unbroken trail of exploitation that spanned 5 years. Each image, each document, was a hammer blow against her ego. Veronica tried to speak, but the words came out in fragmented bursts, desperate and sharp. This is ridiculous. You don't understand business. I'm entitled to protect my interests. Her attorney reached out to calm her, but she swatted him away like an annoying insect, her pride refusing to acknowledge the magnitude of the situation. The courtroom was silent, hanging on the precipice of a storm. and even the cameras seemed to focus on her every twitch, every subtle sign of panic. Rosa Martinez remained seated, calm and dignified, clutching her folder tightly, knowing that truth and persistence had brought her to this moment. Asterisk Judge Judy, unmoved by the flailing defense, began her methodical dismantling of Veronica's arrogance. "Miss Hawley," she said, her voice low but firm, carrying the weight of decades of legal authority, "you have used your father's resources to initiate 23 lawsuits against immigrant-owned small businesses, deliberately targeting those least able to defend themselves. You created social media campaigns to ruin reputations, misrepresented charitable events, and collected funds through coercion. How is this business?" The words cut through the room, sharp and undeniable, leaving no room for the lies Veronica had hoped to lean on. Veronica's lips trembled as she opened her mouth to reply, but no sound came. The young heiress who had entered the courtroom earlier with an air of untouchable confidence was now visibly shaking. She attempted to regain control, shouting, "You don't know what it's like. I can do whatever I want. My father's name protects me." Her words, meant to intimidate, only served to highlight her desperation. Judge Judy's eyes narrowed further, the faintest smile playing on her lips as the trap closed in around Veronica. The judge's assistant handed over the next piece of evidence. Financial records meticulously tracing unreported settlement income from each of Veronica's 23 lawsuits. Judge Judy held up the documents, ensuring the gallery, cameras, and Veronica herself could see the total amounts. The numbers were staggering, over $1.2 million in settlements, much of it hidden from the IRS and routed through shell accounts orchestrated by her father's law firm. The courtroom gasped collectively. Veronica's face drained of color, her perfect makeup streaked from a mix of panic and frustration. "You see, Miss Hawley," Judge Judy continued, her voice carrying both authority and cold precision, "these are not isolated incidents. They are a pattern, a strategy, a business model built on intimidation, exploitation, and deception. Your social media posts, your emails, your contracts, all of it demonstrates calculated cruelty. And the law does not favor cruelty, even when wealth attempts to disguise it." The silence that followed was almost physical, pressing down on Veronica like a weight she could no longer deny. Desperation turned into rage. Veronica stood abruptly, knocking her chair back, and pointed a finger directly at Judge Judy. "You're a joke. You think you can scare me with paperwork? You're nothing. Just another old TV judge." Her voice echoed through the chamber, but rather than intimidating, it revealed the raw panic that had replaced her initial arrogance. Cameras captured every detail, the trembling of her hands, the twitch of her lip, the beads of sweat forming at her temples. Her own attorney tried to calm her, whispering for the 5th time, but Veronica silenced him with a wave of her hand. Unwilling to relinquish the illusion of control, Judge Judy's response was immediate, razor-sharp, and devastating. "Miss Hawley," she said, voice calm but laced with undeniable fury, "threatening me, insulting this courtroom, and attempting to assert power based on wealth alone is a dangerous mistake, one you are about to pay for in full." The room held its collective breath as she opened the red folder, producing the next wave of evidence. Federal charges were documented in precise legal language: 23 counts of wire fraud, 18 counts of extortion, 11 counts of tax evasion, and 4 counts of money laundering. Each count was connected directly to Veronica's actions, leaving no space for ambiguity or excuses. Veronica's knees buckled slightly as she realized the magnitude of what she faced. Her threats, her sneers, her dismissive smirk, all meaningless against the combined weight of law, evidence, and decades of judicial experience. Her father's fortune, which she had always believed could shield her from consequences, suddenly felt powerless. The realization hit her in waves, punctuated by the quiet gasps of a courtroom audience. Even the gallery, filled with spectators who had seen entitlement before, seemed momentarily stunned by the sheer scale of Veronica's fall. The judge then presented the social media evidence, showing posts where Veronica openly mocked her victims, celebrated forced settlements, and flaunted her fake influence. Screens displayed the analytics of purchase followers, highlighting that more than 60% of her Instagram audience was fabricated to intimidate targets. Veronica's own words, once proud, now read like confessions. She had exploited fear, wealth, and perception to manipulate the vulnerable for years. Her face turned ashen, and she gripped the table, realizing that every lie, every boast, every calculated act of intimidation had been documented and would be used against her. Rosa Martinez remained composed, her presence a quiet contrast to Veronica's unraveling. She had waited years for this reckoning, endured threats, legal harassment, and the emotional toll of having her livelihood attacked. Now, with each piece of evidence unveiled, the justice she sought was no longer abstract. It was unfolding in real time. Veronica's smirk, her haughty posture, her sense of invincibility were all eroding before the clarity of truth and the force of judicial authority. The climax of Part 3, built as Judge Judy leaned forward, her voice cutting like steel. "Miss Hawley, you have spent years weaponizing wealth against those who cannot fight back. Today, you face the consequences of your actions. No amount of money, influence, or Instagram followers can undo the harm you've caused. And today, in this courtroom, your arrogance ends." Veronica opened her mouth, but the sound that came out was not a defense. It was a shaky, high-pitched gasp of panic. Her carefully constructed persona of entitlement had shattered completely, and all that remained was fear, humiliation, and the dawning understanding that she had underestimated the law, Judge Judy, and the people she had wronged. The courtroom waited in anticipation, every eye glued to the unfolding drama. Veronica Hawley, the daughter of a billionaire, the Instagram influencer, the self-proclaimed untouchable heiress, was now entirely at the mercy of the law. Judge Judy had systematically dismantled her lies, exposed her crimes, and stripped away the illusion of power that wealth and social media had granted her. The stage was set for the final blow, the moment that would cement this courtroom encounter as one of the most brutal, unforgettable judicial takedowns in history. The tension was palpable, the suspense unbearable, and Veronica's fall from entitlement was almost cinematic in its intensity. Asterisk Veronica. Hale's hands were trembling so violently that the diamond bracelet she had once worn like armor now seemed to mock her. The courtroom had gone completely silent after Judge Judy laid out the federal charges and the social media evidence. The audience, once buzzing with curiosity, now sat in stunned awe, witnessing a young heiress stripped bare in front of the law. Every eye was on her, every camera lens trained on the moment when entitlement collided head-on with justice. Veronica's attorney whispered urgently, trying to salvage some sense of control, but she waved him away. A flicker of panic overtaking her arrogance. Judge Judy, sensing the fragile state of her opponent, leaned slightly forward, her gaze piercing. "Miss Hawley," she began, voice measured but lethal, "you have used your family name and fortune to manipulate, intimidate, and defraud small business owners for years. You believed that no law could touch you. You believed your father's money, your social media influence, and your connections could shield you. Today, you will learn how wrong you were." The words reverberated through the room, leaving Veronica's lips parted in disbelief. She tried to interrupt, her voice rising in desperation. This is harassment. You don't understand business. I'm entitled to defend my interests." Her words, meant to assert control, only emphasized how cornered she had become. The smirk she had perfected for Instagram had vanished entirely, replaced by a twitching mouth and reddening eyes. Her $40,000 Hermes bag, once a symbol of dominance, now lay at her side, useless against the overwhelming reality Judge Judy had constructed. Asterisk Judge Judy raised a hand, silencing Veronica instantly. "Let's review," the judge said, her tone calm but merciless. 23 lawsuits filed against hardworking immigrants. 23 businesses coerced, intimidated, or destroyed. Over $1.2 million in settlements collected, much of it unreported to the IRS. Your social media accounts fabricated influence to enforce fear. You weaponized your father's law firm to intimidate people who could not defend themselves. And now, federal agents are present, waiting to execute the law against you. The words landed like sledgehammers, each syllable shattering with little confidence. Veronica had left. Veronica's face drained of color as she realized the magnitude of the trap. Her threats of influence, her boasts of untouchability were meaningless. For the first time in her life, she felt powerless. She had underestimated not only Judge Judy's intelligence, but also the depth of the investigation that had been conducted over months. The judge's meticulous preparation was now fully visible to everyone in the courtroom. Emails, contracts, financial statements, and screenshots of social media posts lined the monitors. Each a nail in the coffin of Veronica's carefully constructed persona, Rosa Martinez. Seated opposite her, remained composed, a silent embodiment of resilience. Her presence reminded the courtroom of the human cost of Veronica's actions. 8 months of harassment, $45,000 in legal fees, and the devastation of a business built from scratch, all had led to this moment. The contrast between Rosa's dignity and Veronica's crumbling arrogance amplified the drama, highlighting a truth that wealth and influence could not obscure. Justice was not for sale. Asterisk Veronica, desperate to regain control, stood abruptly, her chair scraping across the floor. She pointed a finger at Judge Judy, her voice shaking with fury. "You think you can scare me with your old-fashioned laws? You're a joke. This courtroom is a farce." The audience gasped. Cameras zoomed in, capturing the raw intensity of a woman who had believed herself untouchable, now facing the full weight of reality. Judge Judy's reaction was instantaneous, her eyes narrowing to a deadly focus. "Miss Hawley," she said, her voice icy, "you have spent years undermining the law, abusing your wealth, and terrorizing those less fortunate. Today, your arrogance ends. And it ends here." She opened the thick red folder again, pulling out the next layer of evidence, recorded conversations, invoices proving coercion, and internal memos from Veronica's father's law firm detailing strategies for systematically destroying small businesses. Each document was presented with deliberate precision, the courtroom silent except for the sound of flipping pages. Veronica's panic escalated. She tried to speak over Judge Judy, but her words were incoherent, a mix of fear and anger. This is unfair. You don't understand power. My father, well, he will." Her sentence trailed off as she realized that her threats carried no weight here. The judge's calm authority and the overwhelming evidence left her vulnerable. Exposed and powerless, Judge Judy leaned back slightly, studying Veronica with the measured patience of a predator about to strike. "You are not being judged by power, influence, or wealth. You are being judged by facts. The law is impartial, and the evidence is undeniable. Miss Hawley, your actions have consequences." She gestured to the screens, highlighting each calculated move Veronica had made over the past 5 years. Each pattern of exploitation, each act of coercion, each fabricated post, told a story of intentional harm. Veronica's face fell further, her composure completely shattered. The audience watched as she attempted to maintain a facade, wiping sweat from her brow and clutching her designer handbag like a talisman. Her attorney whispered again, but Veronica silenced him, shaking her head. She had convinced herself for years that money and connections could deflect reality, but now the storm had arrived in full force. The humiliation was compounded as the judge methodically recounted each charge, each act of fraud, each instance of social media manipulation, leaving no room for denial or excuse. Then came the moment that would become unforgettable in courtroom television history. Judge Judy, with deliberate slowness, raised her voice slightly to emphasize the severity of the situation. "Miss Hawley, you threatened me, you insulted this court, and you flaunted wealth as a weapon against innocent people. That arrogance has blinded you to the truth. Today, justice will not be delayed, negotiated, or dismissed. Your arrogance ends here." The words hit Veronica like a thunderclap. Her hands shook, her knees nearly buckled, and her breath came in shallow, panicked gasps. The judge then presented the federal arrest warrant, detailing the charges and specifying that federal agents were waiting to execute it immediately after proceedings. Veronica's eyes widened in horror as the realization settled in. Her freedom, her fortune, and her carefully curated life of entitlement were all teetering on the brink of destruction. She had thought herself untouchable. Now she understood that she was utterly, completely, and irrevocably vulnerable. The courtroom erupted in a mix of gasps and whispered astonishment. Rosa Martinez, witnessing the culmination of months of injustice being addressed, maintained her quiet dignity. For her, this was not spectacle, it was vindication. For Veronica, it was the ultimate collapse, a public, undeniable reckoning of arrogance, greed, and systematic cruelty. Judge Judy concluded this phase of the takedown with a single, sharp sentence that would be replayed endlessly in legal circles and social media. Miss Hall, money cannot buy integrity, influence cannot purchase respect, and no amount of arrogance can shield you from justice. The law does not bend for the privileged, it reveals them. Veronica's face turned pale, her diamond bracelet catching the light one last time, now a symbol not of power, but of her downfall. The tension in the room was almost unbearable as the judge's words settled into reality. Veronica Halle, once untouchable, had been methodically dismantled. The stage was now set for the final act, the moment where justice would fully claim her and her father's empire, leaving her with nothing but the cold, hard truth of accountability. Asterisk. The courtroom was thick with anticipation. Every eye followed Veronica Halle, whose composure had completely collapsed. Her Chanel suit no longer felt like armor, it felt like a prison. The diamond bracelet she had once flaunted now trembled on her wrist, reflecting the harsh fluorescent lights in sharp, mocking glints. Judge Judy's gaze never wavered. She had already dismantled Veronica's ego, exposed her lies, and revealed the federal charges that awaited her beyond the courtroom doors. Now, the final act was about to unfold, the moment when entitlement met accountability and crumbled irreversibly. Veronica tried to speak, her voice cracking with desperation. "This isn't fair. You don't understand. My father, my lawyers, my connections, her protest was cut short as Judge Judy raised a hand. A gesture so authoritative, it silenced every murmuring voice in the courtroom. "Miss Halle, your excuses are irrelevant. You have had every opportunity to act lawfully, to respect the rights of others, and to conduct yourself with decency. You chose to exploit, intimidate, and defraud. Today, there will be no negotiation, no sugarcoating, and no indulgence for privilege." The red folder, already infamous in its own right, was opened once more. Judge Judy's movements were deliberate, precise, almost ritualistic. Every paper she lifted, every document she revealed, had been curated for maximum impact. Bank statements showing unreported settlements, internal emails from her father's law firm coordinating threats, screenshots of Instagram posts flaunting her manipulative exploits, all displayed simultaneously for the courtroom to absorb. The audience gasped at each revelation, the gravity of Veronica's actions settling in like a heavy fog. Veronica's attorney was visibly panicked, whispering urgently as if trying to conjure some miracle that could salvage his client. Veronica waved him off, muttering, "I don't need your help. I can handle this." But it was clear to everyone watching that she had no control, no understanding of the legal trap that had ensnared her. Her confidence, which had once filled rooms, was replaced by tremors, shallow breathing, and the dawning realization that her life as she knew it was ending. Judge Judy leaned forward, her voice dropping to a measured, cutting tone. "Let's review the consequences of your actions. 23 victims, all hardworking business owners, all targeted because of their vulnerability. Over $1.2 million in settlements collected through intimidation, unreported income, tax evasion, wire fraud, extortion, money laundering, and now federal charges for all of the above." Each word hit like a hammer, punctuating the collapse of Veronica's defenses. She felt the weight of every accusation, every document, every verified claim crushing her beneath the sheer force of undeniable truth. Her response was feeble, a whisper of a protest. I can explain. I didn't." Judge Judy cut her off immediately. "No, Miss Halle, You cannot explain away deliberate exploitation. You cannot argue your way out of your own evidence. You cannot charm your way past what you have done. The law does not bend for money or arrogance. The law exists to protect those who cannot protect themselves. And you have spent years proving that you intend to do the exact opposite. Veronica's hands flew to her face as the room seemed to shrink around her. Cameras captured every twitch, every bead of sweat, every tear forming at the corners of her eyes. Her social media empire, her father's fortune, the image she had spent years constructing, all meaningless in this moment. Judge Judy had methodically stripped it all away, layer by layer, exposing the raw, unvarnished truth beneath Dot. Then came the critical moment that would make this courtroom session legendary. Judge Judy stood, the courtroom hanging on her every word. Miss Hale, you are hereby found liable for fraud, extortion, and deliberate financial manipulation of multiple small business owners. You will be held accountable under federal law. The documentation before me, verified and corroborated, leaves no room for dispute. The law will not be delayed, and justice will not be denied. Veronica's face went pale, her voice a trembling whimper. Please, Your Honor. I have a family. I can. Her sentence dissolved into incoherent sobs as the reality of the judgment hit. Judge Judy's eyes, cold and unwavering, remained fixed on her. You have had every chance to act with decency. You chose deception. You chose intimidation. You chose greed. Your tears will not reverse your actions. The courtroom audience was silent except for the quiet sound of Veronica's sobs and the faint hum of the cameras capturing the final moments. Rosa Martinez, who had endured months of harassment and financial devastation, watched with quiet dignity, a testament to the resilience of those who refused to bow to power. The contrast between the victim's strength and Veronica's unraveling was stark. A visual and emotional lesson in the limits of entitlement. Judge Judy then delivered the most unforgettable line of the day. The one that would be replayed endlessly across social media, law schools, and courtroom commentary. Miss Hale, your wealth cannot buy integrity, your influence cannot purchase respect, and your family name cannot shield you from justice. You are not above the law, and you will learn that today. The words were precise, devastating, and final. Asterisk Veronica's sobs escalated. Tears streaking her once perfect makeup, mascara running in black rivulets down her cheeks. Her hands clutched the empty space where her Birkin bag had sat, the accessory now symbolic of power lost. She had walked into the courtroom with a sense of untouchable superiority, only to be reduced to a trembling, inconsolable figure. Judge Judy's surgical dismantling of her arrogance was complete. The final blow came with the announcement that federal agents would be executing an arrest warrant immediately after proceedings. Veronica's father, Richard Hale, had been questioned hours earlier regarding his involvement in enabling her criminal enterprise, further cementing the scope and severity of the case. Veronica's empire of influence, carefully cultivated and meticulously managed, crumbled in real time as the courtroom became a theater of justice rather than privilege. The judge concluded with a stark, unyielding verdict. Miss Hale, let this serve as a reminder to all. No amount of money, social media influence, asterisk, or inherited privilege can shield one from accountability. Justice prevails not for the powerful, but for those who are wronged. Your actions have consequences. Your choices have consequences. And today, you will face them fully. Veronica slumped in her chair, sobs racking her body, her designer ensemble, a hollow testament to everything she had lost. The courtroom cameras captured every nuance, the collapse of an heiress who had believed herself untouchable, the triumph of justice over entitlement, and the raw, emotional vindication of a woman whose life had been upended by systemic abuse of privilege. As the gavel fell, signaling the formal conclusion of the hearing, the audience erupted in quiet applause, not for spectacle, but for the affirmation that justice could still hold the powerful accountable. Social media exploded almost instantly, clips of Veronica's breakdown and Judge Judy's commanding delivery going viral, trending worldwide as millions witnessed the unraveling of entitlement and the ultimate triumph of law. truth, and integrity. For Veronica Halle, the day had started with confidence, arrogance, and entitlement. It ended in humiliation, exposure, and the irreversible consequences of her choices. Judge Judy, calm, composed, and utterly unflinching, had delivered a lesson for the ages. In the courtroom, the law reigned supreme, and no amount of privilege can evade accountability. Asterisk. If you were shocked by Veronica Hale's courtroom downfall, make sure you hit that subscribe button now. Every week, we bring you real courtroom drama, jaw-dropping confrontations, and stories of justice prevailing over privilege. From entitled heirs to powerful figures, no one is safe when the law takes center stage. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a case that will leave you on the edge of your seat. Comment below, what would you have done if you were in Judge Judy's courtroom? Do you think Veronica learned her lesson? Your thoughts might just be featured in our next story. Remember, in this channel, justice isn't optional and every verdict tells a story. Don't miss the next one.